Hello guys, welcome to Cross Harry. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Odin adopted Harry as the true heir of Asgard, and all 9 realms made Dumbledore kneel? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The Spear Remembers. War Master's name was Graper, and he had served in 11 of the 14 recorded wars of Asgard, survived 3 of Loki's attempted coups, and once held a defensive line against a frost giant raiding party for 4 hours using a broken spear and 2 soldiers who were already unconscious, but propped at angles that suggested otherwise. He was, by the consensus of the Einherjar, the most technically precise hand-to-hand instructor in the 9 realms, and he had the patience of someone who had watched kingdoms rise and fall and understood that most things resolved themselves if you gave them sufficient time. He had been trying to call the end of this session for 43 minutes. "Highness," said Graper. The plasma strike hit the eastern wall 3 feet from his head, and the granite there, 3 feet of it, reinforced with dwarven binding runes laid down in the Third Age, developed a crack the length of a man's forearm, with a sound like a fault line making a decision. Graper looked at the crack. He looked at the boy, the prince, standing in the training yard center, breathing through his nose at the measured pace of someone checking their own numbers. He looked at the 2 senior Einherjar, standing at the gate, who had both developed sudden professional interests in the stonework of the opposite wall. "The session," said Graper, "ended at the second bell." "Again," said Harry. The smell in the training yard was ozone and scorched granite, the sharp, mineral smell of lightning that had decided to be structural about itself, which was the smell the yard always carried after Harry had been working at full capacity, which was the smell it carried most mornings. The stones of the floor had absorbed 3 years of this particular kind of scorching, and had developed a faint permanent darkening along the lines where the strikes had landed, which the palace maintenance staff had given up addressing. Graper raised his sword. Harry moved first. The thing about the way Harry Odinson used combat magic, and this was the thing that Graper had noted in his training reports, and that the Einherjar discussed in the specific half-admiring, half-unsettled way veterans discussed something that exceeded their category, was that it did not announce itself. Midgardian wizard drew a wand, an Asgardian satyr practitioner formed the intent with visible preparation, hands shaping the working, breath marking the moment of release. Harry did neither. What happened was simpler and more violent. His intention became physics, without editorial comment between the two. Plasma condensed from ambient stellar energy along the geometry of his will and arrived, already traveling, already at speed, at the point he had decided it should occupy. He did not throw it. He agreed that it should exist somewhere other than where it was, and the universe, which had been educated over 12 years to take his agreements seriously, complied. Graper blocked the first strike with a ward strike that cost him 2 steps backward and the energy equivalent of an hour's work, compressed into 0.4 seconds. The second strike he redirected clean technical execution, 40 years of practice distilled into a single motion, into the floor, where it detonated with a sound like a small door being slammed very hard by something very large. Stone fragments sprayed outward in a radius and smoked where they landed. The third strike Harry redirected himself mid-flight. Graper registered the course change with 1/4 of a second to spare and threw himself flat. The strike crossed the space where his torso had been, continued 3 feet, and hit the wall. The crack that resulted was appreciably longer than the first. The silence afterward was the particular silence of recalibration. Harry stood in the center, one hand at his side, the other resting on the hilt of Skinfaxi at his hip. Blade short, dwarven-forged from stellar iron and Asgardian gold, in an alloy with no name in any Midgardian taxonomy, sat in a register of real that predated the ward systems of any world he had visited. Midgardian detection spells passed through it the way water passed through light, acknowledging the surface, finding nothing to hold. "Third bell," said Graper from the floor. "You pulled the redirect on strike 2, Harry said. He crossed the yard and extended a hand. "You had the angle for a full counter. You chose the redirect because you were conserving for a 4th exchange combination." He waited while Graper took the hand and came upright, then continued without changing register. "That decision works against a standard opponent, against someone who doesn't make standard assumptions. It's a tell." Graper examined the new damage to the eastern wall. He had the particular expression of a man calculating a maintenance report while conducting a simultaneous calculation about professional dignity. "I am not required," he said with great care, "to optimize my combat strategy against my own student. You are required to teach me to survive, which means fighting at your ceiling, not mine." "Those 2 requirements are not." Graper stopped. He turned. He looked at Harry with the look experienced instructors wore when they were trying to determine whether the drive they were seeing was hunger or damage, the two things that produced the same surface behavior in a training yard, and the two things that required completely different responses. Harry met the look with the flat, contained precision he deployed whenever he understood he was being assessed and had no intention of contributing data. The look held for 3 seconds. "Tomorrow," Graper said, "the redirect mechanics, first bell." He retrieved his sword from where the blast had relocated it, 7 feet, which was a new distance, and turned back. "Eat something before you come." Harry had not eaten since the previous afternoon. He filed this under irrelevant. Graper filed it under a category he did not name aloud, but that informed every training report he had written about the prince for the last 2 years, in the careful, specific language of a soldier who knew how to say something true without saying the thing he was actually saying. The Queen of Asgard was at the training yard's gate. She did not enter. She stood at the threshold in the way she stood at most thresholds, as though the door were an optional feature of the architecture that she was choosing, on this occasion, to acknowledge. She wore deep blue, which Harry had learned meant formal context without ceremony, and her hands were empty at her sides. Frigga with empty hands meant she had already decided that her words were the most effective tool available and had left everything else in the room. She had been there long enough to watch Graper make the call 4 times. She was that kind of mother. Harry saw her as he came up the steps and stopped. How long? Long enough. She turned and walked, and he fell into step beside her because this was simply what happened when Frigga began walking somewhere and extended the implicit invitation of her direction and pace. The palace corridor was cool and gold-lit, the permanent warm light of Asgard coming through the arched windows in long horizontal bars that striped the floor in intervals. The stones here were warm under his boots, which was not temperature so much as the particular quality of a place that had been inhabited by enormous amounts of power for such an extended period that the inhabitation had become structural. "There is a letter," she said, "from Midgard." She glanced at him with the expression she wore when he had arrived at something she had been steering him toward, and she was deciding whether to be satisfied or recalibrate. "You came to the yard," Harry said. "Graper doesn't need assistance calling session ends, which means whatever arrived is something you wanted to tell me somewhere without a table." He looked at her. "You put your hands on tables when you're deciding how to frame something. You have been spending too much time with your father," Frigga said, which was her way of confirming something while declining to confirm it. "Come to the hall." The council hall was long and pale-stoned, its table the same surface that had absorbed the weight of every major Asgardian decision for 4 millennia, including at least 3 that had required subsequent significant repair work. The letter sat in the table's center. Odin had placed it there, which meant he wanted it considered on its own terms before he offered any. Harry looked at it without touching it. Heavy cream paper, 3 seals in deep red wax, the International Confederation of Wizards, the British Ministry of Magic, and a smaller personal mark he identified after a moment as Dumbledore's own. The handwriting was precise and exhausted, the kind of precision that came from decades of drafting language around truths that didn't fit cleanly into language. He picked it up and read it. "To the realm of Asgard, attention, His Majesty Odin Allfather. The International Confederation of Wizards, meeting in emergency session, has formally invoked Article 17 of the Treaty of 1692, pertaining to the protection and jurisdiction of magically gifted individuals of Midgardian birth. It has come to the Confederation's attention that a child of confirmed Midgardian magical lineage, registered in the Book of Admittance at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry under the name Harry James Potter, has been removed from Midgardian jurisdiction without the knowledge or consent of his magical guardian, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, or of the Confederation itself. The Confederation respectfully requests the immediate return of the aforementioned individual to Midgardian custody, so that his magical education and legal status may be properly administered under Midgardian law. The Confederation further notes that any delay in compliance with this request may necessitate escalation through relevant international bodies. We remain, with the greatest respect, Albus Dumbledore. Supreme Mugwump. Harry read it twice. He set it on the table with the care of someone returning a document to evidence status rather than reading status, and looked at it without picking it up again. Odin was at the window, which looked north over the city, past the Bifrost Bridge to the observatory at its far end, where Heimdall stood in his perpetual, encompassing attention. He held a cup of something that steamed faintly. He had not turned around. He would not turn around until Harry had processed what he was processing, because Odin understood the specific usefulness of giving people time to arrive at their own conclusions rather than announcing the destination. "He invokes a 1692 treaty," Harry said. "He does. The treaty predates Asgard's formal recognition of Midgardian magical governance by approximately 3 centuries. It does." And it has no provision for an individual who is no longer a Midgardian minor under any applicable law, having been adopted under Asgardian royal succession protocol. Harry looked at the letter. He knows this. He does, Odin said. He is a thorough man. He turned then, and his face was the face Harry had known for 12 years. The single eye, the deep lines, the quality of his expression that was not patience in the way other people were patient, but was the expression of someone who had made a decision in the very distant past and was now watching events arrive at it. He moved to the table. He picked up the letter, looked at it once, and set it down with the flat finality of something being dismissed from further consideration. He is also a frightened man. Frightened men invoke process because process is the architecture they built when they were confident, and in crisis it feels like ground. What is he afraid of? Harry asked. That he is wrong, Odin said, and that the cost of being wrong is everything he was wrong about. He looked at Harry directly, and what was in his eye was neither warmth nor its absence, but something more useful than either. Frank attention, the look of a king who loved what he was looking at and was not sentimental about the love. You will go to Midgard. As what? As my son, Odin said, as Crown Prince of Asgard and heir to the sovereignty of the 9 realms. As what you are. He moved to the window again, this time facing the room rather than the city, which meant the deliberating was done. You will go first to the Ministry of Magic. You will lay out the legal position. You will give them 24 hours to respond through official channels, and then Hogwarts. You will go to Hogwarts, Odin said. You will speak to Dumbledore. You are better equipped for that conversation than anyone else I could send. Because he'll try to reach the child, Harry said, and I'm not a child. Because, Odin said, with the particular patience of a man correcting an almost accurate conclusion, he is genuinely intelligent and genuinely sincere, and when both of those things are pointed at you simultaneously, the response requires someone who can meet both. He looked at Harry steadily. Contempt would be easy. Understanding is the thing that disarms him. Harry absorbed this. You've arranged the follow-up. Heimdall has been monitoring Midgard's political situation for 3 days. The ministry has known about the letter for a week before it arrived here. They deliberated before sending it. Odin's voice had not changed pitch or temperature. It was the same measured register he used to discuss trade agreements and existential threats both, because he did not modulate volume with stakes, only with proximity. They are not naive men, but they are operating within a framework whose ceiling is significantly lower than the situation requires. He looked toward the Bifrost through the window. Should they require education on that ceiling, I will provide it. Personally, Harry said. Personally. Harry looked at the letter on the table. He put magical guardian, he said. Dumbledore, not legal guardian, not family. He was quiet for a moment. He assigned himself a category that implies duty without proximity. He was guarding me from a distance of several hundred miles while I was in a cupboard. Odin said nothing. He did not need to. What he had done about that circumstance 12 years ago was the answer to every question that the cupboard raised, and it was a more complete answer than language could have produced, so he had not used language then, and did not now. Speak first, Odin said, draw second, and if the speaking isn't heard, then what comes after, Odin said, will be heard by everyone. He picked up his cup. Now go to your mother. She has been waiting to tell you something since this morning, and she will not thank either of us for the delay. The long staircase to Frigga's West Tower workroom wound through the palace's oldest section, where the stones had been laid before the current city existed, and the walls were so saturated with old cedar that the air had a faint metallic taste, the taste of power in long-term residence. The workroom door was always open. Frigga's view was that doors communicated either invitation or exclusion, and she preferred to manage both through subtler means. The room was warm, and it smelled of clean metal and something else, a cool undercurrent like water over stone, which was the ambient smell of high-level cedar in active state, the way a forge smelled of fire not from the fire itself, but from the heat that had soaked into everything around it over years of use. The walls were threaded with golden light, active workings, dozens of them, some running on instructions given so long ago that Frigga had forgotten issuing them, and they had simply continued, doing their work with the autonomous efficiency of things that had been taught properly. Frigga was at her work table when Harry entered. She looked up with the expression she wore when she had been waiting for a specific person and was not going to say so. She stood and came around the table, picked up the bone comb from the edge, and made a gesture. Harry turned the chair and sat with his back to her. She began working through the knot that the training session had built in his hair, with the brisk impersonality of a woman who had been managing post-combat hair situations for 3,000 years and found them a reliable context for significant conversations, because people talked more honestly when someone's hands were occupied with something other than watching them. 947, Harry said. At the last count, she worked through a section at his crown with the efficiency of certainty. There may be 3 more under the basement foundation, using a notation I have not encountered before. Pre-Confederation, possibly. The style has characteristics of Welsh mountain folk magic from the 11th century, which is either impressive historical scholarship or inherited practice. I haven't determined which. Harry was quiet for a moment. Outside the tower window, the Bifrost caught the afternoon light and scattered it into long prismatic bars that crossed the rooftops of the city below. Blood wards among them, combed through, separate, the habitual motion of her hands independent of everything else. Also 5 passive loyalty compulsions, very subtle, sub-awareness threshold, the kind that read as natural inclination rather than external pressure. Designed to make you feel, when you were old enough to encounter the magical world, that you belonged within certain parameters. That deviation from those parameters would feel wrong. She did not alter her voice when she said this. I have removed those entirely, and the predictive net, left intact, partially unraveled. She gathered a section of his dark hair, the same shade as Lily Potter's in the photographs Odin had found and had framed in Harry's rooms without announcement, simply placed there one morning when Harry was 10, and began a plate with the efficiency of absolute competence. When you arrive, Dumbledore will believe his monitoring system is functioning. He will have data on your current power level that is approximately 4 years out of date. You've built him a false floor. I have ensured his map is not current. She secured the plate with a cord of gold, the warrior's single braid, the royal combat designation. Harry had not asked for it. She had decided, which was how she decided most things, before the need was named, so that the naming, when it came, found the need already met. You will plan around a prince who is somewhat less formidable than you are. His contingencies will reflect that. She stepped back and moved around to face him, with the assessing look she wore when she was checking something against an internal standard. His contingencies will be inadequate. That's ruthless. I have been called worse by people who were not trying to reclaim my child, she said, with complete pleasantness. Harry looked at her. The quality of her composure in this moment was the thing that the stories never got right. They made her soft, auxiliary, the warmth beside Odin's iron. What she actually was, at the operational level, was the most dangerous person he had personally encountered across 12 years of encountering dangerous people. And she was dangerous in the specific way that was hardest to defend against, because she had already acted before anyone identified the threat. 947 wards. She had been dismantling the architecture of his captivity from another realm over 3 days, while simultaneously running the Seder mapping of his scar, the diplomatic legal research, and at least 4 other active projects. And she had done it all without telling him because she didn't need help and she didn't need credit. She needed it done. What will he try? Harry said. Dumbledore. Frigga sat across from him and picked up the thread of the Seder working she had apparently been mid-process on when he arrived. Her fingers moved through the golden light with the casual economy of absolute mastery, the same way Graper's hands moved when he was doing technique he didn't need to think about. He will try the greater good, she said. He believes it. That is what makes it effective, not the argument itself, but the sincerity of the person making it. He has organized his entire moral universe around a principle that is genuinely principled, and within that universe, the logic is sound. The problem is that his universe has the wrong dimensions. He'll try the sacrifice, Harry said. He'll try the necessity, she said, which is a more sophisticated version of the same argument. Not you must die, but this is what the situation requires, and we must be brave enough to accept what the situation requires. Her fingers continued their work. And he'll reach for the boy who was in the cupboard. He'll try to find the child inside the prince, because the child is the one he has a plan for. He won't find him, Harry said. No, Frigga said simply. He won't. They were quiet for a moment. The Seder threads moved in the light, with the gentle inevitability of things that had been set in motion long ago and were proceeding on schedule. Outside, Asgard turned on its own deep rhythms, the city below continuous and warm, the Bifrost at the bridge's end catching the day and throwing it back in colors that had no names in most languages. There is something else, Frigga said. She set down the Seder thread and looked at him with the directness she never softened, because softening it would have been a different kind of condescension than she was willing to offer anyone she respected. Harry waited. When your father went to Midgard, she said, 12 years ago, he did not go because of the prophecy. He knew of it, he was not moved by it. She looked at him with the steadiness of someone who had been building to a specific truth for a specific reason and was now arriving at it. Heimdall showed him what was in that house, on that street, on that ordinary English afternoon in November. And Odin looked at what Heimdall showed him and made a decision in, I would estimate, knowing him, approximately 3 seconds. What was the decision? Harry said. Frigga looked at him for a moment that held the quality of something being transferred, not information, which he already had, but something heavier, the kind of thing that required the right container and the right moment. It was a father, she said, recognizing his child. The room held the silence of that. In the walls, an old ward pulsed once, something ancient and self-contained, running on instructions that had been given so long ago that even Frigga had lost the original context, and the pulse was gold and brief, and then the ward went back to its work. Harry sat with the weight of what she had said, and did not move, and did not speak, and she let him have it, because she always let him have the things he needed to have properly, rather than rushing past them for the next piece. It was how she loved, not loudly, not with declarations. With rooms made available at the right moment, with hands that combed out knots and braided warrior plates before anyone said the word battle, with 947 wards dismantled in silence, so that when her son went to the place that had kept him cold and dark, it would find him not with teeth bared, but with every defense already removed, already defeated, already turned to dust by a woman who had never stopped for one moment operating on his behalf. He left at the last light of Asgardian afternoon, when the sun over the city had gone the color of cooling bronze, and the shadows between the towers had grown long enough to touch the eastern gates. Heimdall was at the Bifrost Observatory's end, as Heimdall was always at the Bifrost Observatory's end. In 12 years, Harry had never found him anywhere else, and had developed the settled understanding that the gatekeeper's relationship to this particular spot of bridge in Starfield was not employment, but something more like identity. He stood in gold armor with his amber eyes open to everything, and his expression conveying the mild interest of someone who was simultaneously watching 17,000 separate events unfold across 9 realms, and finding several of them worth attention. The ministry, Harry said, emergency session, 23 members in the chamber. Heimdall's voice was always slightly distant, the quality of attention distributed too widely to concentrate entirely on one point. 11 are afraid, 9 are uncertain. 3 are angry in a way that is really a more intense form of afraid. One is writing a memorandum, Dumbledore. At his desk, Heimdall was quiet for a moment, which indicated selection rather than uncertainty. He always had more information than he was offering, and the pause was editorial. He has a bowl of sweets on his desk. He has been at the desk since dawn. He has not touched the sweets. Another pause. He is reading, the same 4 pages in rotation for the past 2 hours. Harry looked out from the bridge's end at the stars beyond Asgard's atmospheric shimmer, at Midgard's blue-white presence in the distance, turning with the infuriating serenity of a planet that had no idea it was about to have a conversation it had been avoiding for 16 years without knowing it was avoiding it. The castle, Harry said, Hogwarts, when I send the signal, everything in position in under 10 minutes. 7, said Heimdall. 7, Harry agreed. He put his thumb to the rune carved into Gungnir's inscription on the gate post, the rune for home, cut so deep it was permanently shadowed despite the gold that surrounded it, because Odin had cut it himself, and Odin always cut deep enough to last. The pressure of the stone under his thumb was specific and known, warm, the same temperature as his hand, as though the stone had been waiting at that precise warmth for him to arrive. He stepped into the Bifrost. The transit was instantaneous, which was another way of saying it existed in a duration that did not have a human name. What occupied the space between departure and arrival was entirely the traveler's own business. Harry had asked Odin once what he thought about in the Bifrost. Nothing, Odin had said, I'm already there. Harry spent this particular transit running through the mechanics of the redirect block that Graper had used on Strike 2, and the 3 different approaches that could exploit the tell he had identified, and which one he would open with tomorrow at the first bell. He also thought briefly about whether the crack in the eastern wall had been his best angle, or whether a fractionally different trajectory would have hit the resonance point in the reinforcing runes and produced a more instructive demonstration of consequence. The Ministry of Magic arrived around him in a column of gold light. The building's ward system registered the arrival as an incursion event of unprecedented category and began cycling through its response protocols, which were sophisticated, layered, and in the moment, exactly as relevant as a lock on a door that had ceased to exist. The wards made contact with what they were assessing, found nothing in their taxonomy for it, and performed the only reasonable action available. They stood aside and let whatever this was proceed, the way a river stands aside for geography. The atrium of the British Ministry of Magic was blue-lit and vast, with golden statues that Harry recognized from Heimdall's descriptions. A wizard, a witch, a centaur, a goblin, a house elf, all in heroic bronze arrangement, and a fountain that had stopped mid-flow when the Bifrost arrived and was now very slowly deciding whether it had permission to restart. People in the atrium had stopped moving entirely. There were perhaps 40 of them, ministry workers in various states of mid-task, an aura patrol of 3 near the lift, 2 witches in lime green who appeared to work for a department of some kind, a wizard in extremely formal robes who had been in the act of crossing the floor and was now rooted, a very young man in shirt sleeves who had just dropped an armful of folders and appeared to have forgotten that he had done so. Harry looked around the atrium. He took in the architecture, older than it wanted to appear, the bones of it medieval even under the modern magical renovation, and the faces of the people in it, all turned toward him in the specific stillness of people who had registered something outside their parameters and were waiting to determine what category it belonged to. "I need to speak with the Minister for Magic," Harry said, in English that carried no regional inflection of any kind, because Frigga had been absolute on the subject of linguistic precision and had provided sufficient tutors over sufficient years to enforce the point. "Please tell him that Crown Prince Harry Odinson of Asgard is in the atrium." The young man in shirt sleeves looked at the folders on the floor, then at Harry, then at the folders, in the recursive loop of someone whose cognitive processes had temporarily exceeded their capacity. "Thank you," Harry said, and waited. Cornelius Fudge arrived 14 minutes later, which meant he had spent 11 of those minutes in genuine deliberation about dress. Harry could tell from the compromise the man had arrived at, which satisfied neither formal nor working requirements, and suggested a committee of one who had reached an impasse. He had 4 aurors behind him, arranged not aggressively, but in the configuration of institutional reassurance. They were there so that Fudge felt like someone was behind him, not because anyone had assessed an actual tactical situation and determined a response. One of the 4, though the one on the far left, with a scar along his jaw and the eyes of someone who had spent serious time in serious fields, was watching Harry with the genuine professional assessment of someone who had evaluated real threats before and was currently running that process on new data. Harry noted him and filed the notation as relevant. Fudge came to the distance his subconscious had selected as the optimal point between proximity and retreat, and said, "Now," and then stopped. He had looked directly at Harry, and something in what he saw had made the sentence he had prepared inadequate for the situation it was being asked to address. "Minister Fudge," said Harry. "Yes," said Fudge, with the recovery of a man who understood that the political cost of visible disconcertion was higher than the cost of pretending composure. "You are the claim is Harry James Potter," Harry said, born 31 July 1980, Godric's Hollow, England. "Also Harry Odinson, Crown Prince of Asgard, heir apparent to the sovereignty of the 9 realms, adopted under Asgardian royal succession protocol on 1 November 1981 by Odin Allfather and Frigga Allrunstittir, Queen of Asgard." Both designations are accurate, both carry legal operative force. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, Asgardian cut, royal black and gold, and no, it was not the dress that Midgardian teenagers wore, and yes, that was an intentional choice, and produced a document on vellum that was sealed with something that was gold in color but not gold in composition, a material with the structural integrity of things that had been made to outlast the civilizations that made them. This is the formal registration of adoption and succession, witnessed by representatives of 7 of the 9 realms, and ratified at Yggdrasil's root by the World Tree's keeper. He placed it on the edge of the fountain, which had at this point decided against restarting. "The International Confederation," Fudge began, "has invoked Article 17 of the 1692 Treaty," Harry said. "Yes." 3 relevant observations. He did not produce notes. He did not need to. 12 years of an Asgardian education meant, among other things, that he had been expected to memorize primary documents and apply them in argument from the age of 6. First, the treaty predates Asgard's formal engagement with Midgardian magical governance, which makes its jurisdictional claims inapplicable to Asgardian nationals. Second, I am not a minor under any law to which Asgard is subject. I am 16 by Midgardian reckoning, and a legal adult under the succession protocols that govern my status. Third, the 1692 treaty contains no provision for individuals adopted into the sovereign house of a non-Midgardian realm. The treaty's drafters did not anticipate the 9 realms. He paused. They should have. Fudge had recovered his composure to the extent that he was not visibly alarmed, which Harry credited to either genuine resilience or the specific Midgardian political gift for performing equilibrium when none existed. "We are not, the ministry's position is not adversarial. We simply have a responsibility to." "I understand the responsibility," Harry said. "I'm not here to dispute your good faith. I'm here to inform you of a legal position." He picked up the document from the fountain's edge and held it out because Fudge had not moved toward it. "You have 24 hours to provide a formal response through official channels. I'd suggest consulting your legal division and then, separately, because they will not have sufficient context, whoever handles Midgard's international magical treaties." Fudge took the document. His hands were steady, which was more than Harry had expected, and he revised his assessment of the man fractionally upward from middling capability to middling capability with genuine nerve. "And if the Confederation does not, if the response is not, Then my father will provide clarity, Harry said. He prefers to do that in person. He is thorough. The aura with the scar was still watching Harry with the same calibrated attention he had been applying since arrival. Harry held his gaze for one moment, not a challenge, just an acknowledgement. I see you too, and the aura's expression did not change, which was its own form of response. There is the matter, Fudge said, gathering himself with the visible effort of a man who has a card he intends to play and is positioning himself to play it, of Albus Dumbledore, who has been the responsible party, who has been managing this situation for 15 years, and who would, it might be productive if you were to. I'd like to speak with Dumbledore, Harry said. Fudge stopped. Yes, I think that would be Hogwarts. He's at Hogwarts if you. I'll need access to the castle, Harry said, a portkey or the flue, whichever the ministry prefers. Of course, Fudge was already producing a level of cooperative efficiency that surprised Harry for half a second before he understood it. The ministry wanted this conversation to happen, because the ministry had correctly identified Dumbledore as the load-bearing structure of their position, and if there was going to be a resolution that didn't require the ministry itself to make a decision that exceeded its parameters, Dumbledore was going to have to make it. They were routing it to the man who always handled the unprecedented things. Harry accepted the portkey, a small bronze disc, and turned it in his fingers. He could feel the wardwork on it, the ministry's magic, competent and careful, and operating at a ceiling that sat comfortably within the range of things he'd been doing since he was 12. He considered briefly pointing this out. He decided against it. Politeness was also a tool, and its best uses were the ones that cost you nothing to deploy. Before he activated it, he walked the atrium's perimeter once, not quickly, his hands at his sides, as though he was simply taking in the architecture. He was also in the same motion, running a light verification pass on the ward layers, testing the depth of them, the configuration, the pressure points, the specific vulnerabilities that accrued to any ward system that had grown through accumulation rather than unified design. He reduced the load by 30% on the south-facing layer, carefully, the way you turned a dial rather than pulled a switch, leaving everything functional but fractionally quieter. An audit note filed in Asgardian terms. I was here, and this is what was available to me, and I left it standing because I chose to. Not hostile, just accurate. He activated the portkey and let Hogwarts receive him. The castle courtyard received him in late afternoon, the low sun cutting through the towers in long, cold bars. He straightened the collar of his jacket. He ran a hand along the warrior's plate, confirming the cord was straight. Skinfaxi sat at his hip in the absence from detection that was its permanent state, not hiding, simply existing in a register that Midgardian ward systems had no instrument to measure, which was not stealth but category. The courtyard stones were old. He could feel the age of them through his boots, not temperature, but density, the specific weight of things that had been here long enough to absorb the character of everything that had happened above them. 800 years of children learning magic, of teachers moving through these corridors with chalk dust and knowledge, and the particular tired dedication of people who had chosen work that required them to care about people who would eventually leave. It had a specific quality, that accumulation, not like the palace, which was power concentrated in continuity. More like sediment, layer after patient layer of ordinary human effort building into something that had become, over time, extraordinary not through intention but through persistence. Hogwarts noticed him. That was the most accurate description he had for it. The castle's magic registered his presence the way old things registered other things that carried weight, not with alarm but with attention, the way deep water registered something entering it, everywhere simultaneously, without disturbance. The professor waiting at the courtyard entrance was a tall woman, black, with bearing that Harry placed within one assessment, as the kind earned rather than assigned. She looked at him the way the scarred aura had looked at him, not the performance of calm, but the genuine assessment of someone determining what they were dealing with, running real analysis, taking the actual measure. Professor McGonagall, he said. Prince Odinson, she said, and the title cost her something and she did not spend it visibly, which told him a great deal about her. Headmaster is expecting you. She walked him through the castle in the specific silence of someone who had decided that the situation was too large for small talk and too important for performed conversation. The corridors between classes were nearly empty, and the students they passed registered him with the total, helpless attention that teenagers gave to anything that exceeded their existing frame of reference, and then with the varying degrees of success that the same teenagers attempted to look as though they had not stared. The portraits tracked him. He caught them consulting each other in quick, whispered exchanges that ceased the moment they registered that he had registered them. He found this straightforwardly charming, in the way of things that were also genuinely interesting, an art form that was also a communication network, which was a level of ambient intelligence that even Asgard, for all its accumulated sorcery, had not produced in exactly this configuration. A gargoyle at the base of Dumbledore's staircase announced him before he arrived. Harry noted the announcement mechanism, enchanted stone observer feeding directly to the office above, real-time alert system disguised as decorative architecture, and filed it alongside everything else this castle had shown him in the last 4 minutes. Hogwarts was not what it appeared to be. It appeared to be a school. It was actually a very sophisticated accumulated intelligence that had been masquerading as a school for 8 centuries, and the masquerade had been so successful that even the people living inside it had mostly forgotten the distinction. The staircase moved under his feet, rotating stone, which was an architectural choice he found either inspired or maximally impractical and possibly both simultaneously, and delivered him to the office door. He opened it and went in. The office was circular and full of the evidence of a mind that had been working for 115 years without clearing its desk. Instruments doing unspecified things on every surface. Portraits ranked on the curved walls in the patient silence of painted people who had been watching this room across administrations and had opinions. Books shelved in an order that was clearly internally coherent to their owner and entirely opaque to anyone else. A particular ambient density of a space that has processed more significant events than its square footage should reasonably have been asked to absorb. Behind the ancient dark wood desk, Dumbledore. He was older than his files. Not in years, the documentation had the years right, but in the way that some people aged toward density rather than reduction, so that what you saw when you looked at him was not what had been taken away, but what had been added. 115 years of paying attention, of caring about outcomes, of making decisions whose costs compounded across decades. It showed not his frailty, but his weight, and the weight was specific and recognizable. The weight of someone who has been carrying other people's survival for a very long time and has become so accustomed to the load that he has forgotten what it felt like before it. He was standing when Harry entered, which was courtesy. He gestured to the chair, which was courtesy. The bowl of lemon drops between them on the desk, placed for Harry, positioned for a child in an uncomfortable social situation, was a reading error disguised as hospitality. Harry sat. He did not reach for a sweet. Harry, said Dumbledore, and the name landed with the weight he had intended it to carry, warm, without title, a deliberate frame. Not Prince, not Odinson, but the Midgardian given name, the name of the boy he had plans for. Headmaster, said Harry. Dumbledore sat. He looked at Harry over his half-moon spectacles with the particular quality of attention that Heimdall had described, and Harry was now experiencing directly, genuinely interested, reading everything visible, warm in a way that was entirely real, and underneath the warmth, wound as tight as a mechanism whose spring had not released in 15 years, the urgent need for this conversation to arrive at a specific destination. You've grown, said Dumbledore. 12 years tends to allow for it. Yes, he folded his hands. I want to begin with something that is simply true, without any agenda attached to it. I am glad you're alive, Harry. Whatever the distance between our positions, and I recognize the distance is considerable, that is not a negotiating posture. It is a fact, and I have felt it as a fact for 12 years. I appreciate it, Harry said, and meant it, because Frigga had told him what to do with genuine sincerity. Meet it with equal weight, don't deflect it, don't absorb it as advantage. It was true. I am also alive, which is relevant to several parts of the conversation we're going to have. Dumbledore's gaze sharpened fractionally. You visited the ministry an hour ago and gave Cornelius 24 hours. The document is with him. He's probably already owled you. Harry settled back in the chair without tension, the way you settled into a known posture before a technical session. The legal position is straightforward. I have a feeling you know that already. I know the legal position is complex, Dumbledore said carefully. Complex is a courtesy frame, Harry said. The position is that I'm an Asgardian national of legal majority, and the 1692 treaty has no applicable jurisdictional reach. You know this. You wrote the letter anyway, which tells me the letter was not primarily a legal document. It was a message. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, in the voice of a man who has decided to abandon one approach for a better one, what do you think the message was? That Midgard wants me to know it's watching, Harry said, and possibly that you wanted Odin to know you intended to deal with this through official channels rather than direct action, which is itself a diplomatic courtesy, dressed in legal language. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment over the spectacles. Then he took them off and cleaned them, which Harry had been told was the action he performed when he needed a half-second of genuine recalibration, not performance, not stalling, just the honest need to reset after an encounter had exceeded its anticipated parameters. When he put them back on, something in his expression had shifted, not defeat, not retreat. Different honesty, The honesty of a man of tremendous intelligence who has recognized that the person across from him is conducting the same process at equivalent speed and has been doing so from the moment he walked in. "May I ask you something?" said Dumbledore directly. "Yes, do you remember England?" He said it without the question mark's full weight, not what do you remember, but the simpler, more personal reach. The rain, the stone, anything that was yours before it wasn't. He was looking for the thread of nostalgia, the filament of Midgardian belonging that would lead him to the child under the prince. "I remember the dark," Harry said, "specifically, and the cold I was 4. He held Dumbledore's gaze. "I don't remember England. I remember a room under stairs." He paused one beat, "and then I remember my father." The office was very quiet. One of the instruments on the shelf ticked twice, then stopped, as though it had thought better of drawing attention to itself. Dumbledore looked at his hands on the desk. He looked at them for a full 3 seconds, which was a long time in the context of a conversation moving at this pace, and Harry let him have it, the way Odin let people have the time they needed to arrive at their own honest ground. When Dumbledore looked up, his eyes were very blue and very clear, and what was in them now was not strategy. It was something older and less manageable than strategy. "There is a prophecy," he said, and his voice went heavy with the weight of 15 years compacted into 6 words. "Yes," said Harry, "then you know." "The soul fragment in the scar," Harry said, "the inadvertent Horcrux." "Yes," silence. "My mother mapped it 3 years ago," Harry said. "Seder leaves a signature. A soul fragment has a specific one, distinct from the host, identifiable, characterizable. She found it, documented it, and has been developing an extraction method that does not require harm to the host." He waited one beat. "It can be done without my death. We have a schedule." Dumbledore was very still. "The prophecy describes one possible future among a branching set," Harry said. "My father consulted the Norns. Not prophecy, a direct conversation with the mechanisms that record fate, which provides branches rather than terminus. Voldemort can be ended, the fragment can be removed. Neither requires my death, and neither, in fact, requires me to be the instrument at all, though I intend to be involved." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "Those are my parents' murderers. I have opinions about that." Dumbledore removed his spectacles again. He set them on the desk this time, rather than cleaning them. He sat without them, which made him look different, less the composed headmaster, and more simply an old man at his desk, at the end of a very long day, that had turned out to contain a resolution he had not known was available. "If I had known," he said quietly, "Harry, if there had been any, the choices I made were yours," Harry said, "made sincerely in service of people you love within the framework of what you believed was possible." He leaned forward. "I understand that, completely. And I need you to understand this with the same clarity. I'm not here about the past. I'm here because the present has a problem, and the present's problem requires your cooperation, and I'm telling you that Asgard has a better solution than the one you built." He let that land. "We will deal with Voldemort. We will deal with the Death Eaters. The magical world of Midgard still has a crisis that requires resolution. We have the means to contribute to that resolution. All I'm asking is that you let the architecture you built come down without requiring a war to do it." Dumbledore sat very still. Outside the tower window, Scotland was going gray-gold in the evening light, the hills beyond the castle grounds drawing long shadows toward the tree line. "You said with my cooperation," Dumbledore said, "or without it." "Yes, but you prefer with, yes." Dumbledore looked at him across the bowl of untouched sweets, and what was in his expression at this moment was the specific look of a man whose load has been lifted by someone who arrived without warning and set it down as though it weighed nothing, which makes the man feel not relief exactly, but the complex thing that comes after relief, the sudden awareness of how long the weight has been there. Harry felt it. He did not name it. He watched Dumbledore's face complete whatever internal process 15 years of unbearable necessity had been waiting to complete, and he waited, and the castle around them held the quiet of a building that had been listening. Then Dumbledore said, "I have a condition." Harry was quiet. "1," Dumbledore said, "the magical people of this world of Britain of Earth must retain their sovereignty. Asgardian alliance, yes. Asgardian assistance, yes. But they are not subjects of the 9 realms, and they cannot be governed from above, however benevolent the governance." Harry looked at him for a moment. "That is our position also," he said. "Asgard has no interest in administering Midgard. We are here to establish that I cannot be claimed, not to claim anyone else." Dumbledore let out a breath. Slow, controlled, and very long, and something in his frame released a tension that had been held there so long it had become posture rather than effort. And then the sound came. It was not loud. It came from outside, from the grounds, from the direction of the main courtyard, and it was the sound of the Bifrost opening in large-scale multi-exit configuration. a chord of frequencies struck simultaneously on an instrument the size of a sky, harmonically complex and entirely unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were listening for. Dumbledore's head came up. Harry rested his hand on the hilt of Skinfaxi, one hand, a resting posture, not a drawing posture. "I should mention," he said, "that I gave the Ministry 24 hours. I did not give myself 24 hours. Dumbledore looked at him across the desk. "Shall we go outside?" Harry said. Chapter 2, The Weight of 9 Worlds. The sound reached the castle's foundations before it reached its windows. Hogwarts registered the Bifrost's arrival the way living things registered earthquakes, not through the ears first, but through the soles of the feet, through the chest, through the specific biological alarm of something large making its presence known at a frequency below language. The stone of the office floor transmitted it upward through the chair legs, through the desk, through the bowl of untouched lemon drops that rattled once against the ceramic and went still. Dumbledore was already moving toward the door. Harry was already through it. The spiral staircase took them down in the rotating stone's unhurried revolution, and the sounds from outside were resolving now into distinct events, not one arrival but a sequence of them, each with its own acoustic signature, each separated from the last by the precise interval of a coordinated deployment rather than a chaotic one. The Bifrost's primary discharge was the largest, a bass chord that had no human instrument equivalent, the sound of stellar energy channeled through a structure the size of a mountain into a space the size of a courtyard. It came from the north face of the grounds, and it came in pulses, each pulse the marker of another transit completing. The gargoyle at the staircase's base was completely silent, which was more alarming than anything it might have said. McGonagall was in the corridor, moving toward the entrance hall with 3 other professors at her back, a heavy-set man in green robes who smelled of earth and something older than earth, a woman in gray whose expression had the look of someone running threat assessments while walking, a young man with a scarred face who had his wand already in his hand, and then on seeing Harry, returned it to his robes with the specific precision of someone who had taken the measure of a situation and revised his response. Behind them in every direction, students were appearing in doorways, at the ends of corridors, at the tops of stairs, the particular gravity of something unprecedented pulling the population of the building toward its windows. The entrance hall's great doors were already open. Harry walked through them into the courtyard, and the courtyard was gold. The Einherjar came first, 30 of them through the primary Bifrost, arrayed in the horseshoe configuration that Asgardian protocol used for formal diplomatic attendance, not a combat posture, not a defensive one, but the posture that said we are here in strength, and we know it and we want you to know that we know it, which was a different kind of statement than either attack or guard. Their armor was black iron over Asgardian gold, the combination that produced the specific visual effect of controlled darkness around a controlled light, and their spearshafts came down on the courtyard stones simultaneously, the impact of 30 iron-shod poles on 800-year-old granite, producing a sound that was less percussion than punctuation. They did not advance, they did not speak. They stood in the horseshoe around the Bifrost's touchdown point and were simply present, and on Einherjar in full configuration, presence was sufficient. The second event did not announce itself with sound. On the eastern grounds, a Vanaheim Seder gate opened, not a hole torn in space, not a portal with the violence of forced passage, but a door of light that had decided to exist without the inconvenience of requiring a frame. It was the width of 3 people standing side by side, and it was the color of late afternoon filtered through quartz, and the 6 Vanir emissaries who came through it moved with the particular grace of people who existed in continuous relationship with a larger category of power than the one they were currently operating in. They wore silver and white, the formal diplomatic colors of Vanaheim, and their own Seder moved around them in passive visible patterns, not aggressive, not contained, simply present the way weather was present, a natural state rather than a deployed one. They took positions at the courtyard's eastern edge without being directed and said nothing, and the Seder around them continued its quiet, visible business, and the professors who had gathered at the courtyard entrance watched the patterns in the light with the expressions of people who had spent their careers studying magic, and were now watching it operate in a register they had access to none of the instruments to measure. Then the sky moved. It moved because something in it was descending, and the things descending were not birds and not clouds, and not anything that Midgardian taxonomy had produced a category for. 3 vessels of Nidavellir iron, black, absolute, the black of something that had been forged in a place where light had been present long enough to be understood, and then deliberately excluded from the final product, came out of the cloud cover above Scotland with the absolute indifference to aerodynamics of things that had decided physics was a guideline rather than a constraint. They were shaped like nothing that needed to move through air. They moved through air anyway. They descended to 200 feet above the grounds and held position with the serene permanence of geography, and then their ramps descended, and the Nidavellir contingent came down them, 5 master smiths in ceremonial bronze, each carrying the tools of the dwarven trade. The tools and the weapons were the same objects. Everyone who had ever dealt with Nidavellir understood this without being told. Harry stood at the center of the courtyard and watched, and behind him he heard the sounds of Hogwarts absorbing what it was seeing, not panic, nothing so simple, but the specific collective recalibration of several hundred people revising their understanding of the maximum size of what a day could contain. Feet on stone, voices dropping to registers below conversation, the sound of windows being opened wider on every courtyard-facing face of the castle, the particular quality of mass attention when it has found something too large to look away from. The forbidden forest went bright, not all at once. The light moved through it the way living things moved through living things, from tree to tree, canopy to canopy. The light of stars filtered through green and multiplied and brought to a brightness that had no heat in it, only clarity. The Eljozolfarvolfheim did not use fixed gates. They moved through living tissue the way water moved through sand, present everywhere along the path simultaneously, emerging at the far edge as whole individuals who had never, in any conventional sense, been in transit. They were tall, and their silence was the silence of things that had never found sound strictly necessary for communication, and they took positions along the tree line, in the particular stillness of beings, for whom stillness was not a resting state, but a mode of action. The light in the forest settled and did not go out. It remained as a quality of the tree line rather than a spectacle of it, which was more unsettling than any dramatic display. Then, below. The shift in the dungeon stones was not loud. It was the sound of the castle's foundations, renegotiating a relationship with something that had requested passage through them rather than around them. A lateral rumble, brief, the kind of structural movement that told you a building was not breaking, but was instead being asked to be more flexible than it had previously considered necessary. The fissure that opened in the dungeon floor was not a rupture but an invitation, and through it came the dark elves of Svartalfheim, who moved through stone the way time moved through all things, without drama, without debris, with the absolute certainty of a process that knew itself to be both older and more permanent than the material it was currently passing through. They emerged at the courtyard's western edge, 4 of them, in the gray and void black of Svartalfheim's formal attendants. They said nothing to anyone, they acknowledged nothing, they stood and were present, which was their diplomatic protocol. The Allfather had asked them to witness, they were witnessing. The transaction was complete on their end, everything else was administrative. Hogwarts made a sound. It was a sound below sound, a frequency that lived in the chest cavity rather than the ear canal, the sound of 800 years of accumulated stone and magic and human effort and accumulated history performing a single, slow, structural assessment of its current load, not breaking, not warning. The sound of something very old and very capable deciding, with the intelligence of long practice, that it could carry what was being placed on it, and choosing to do so, and the choosing being audible because the load was significant enough that the choice required effort. One of the Hogwarts professors, the woman in gray, put her hand against the courtyard wall and held it there, feeling the vibration, and her expression shifted from threat assessment to something that had no professional category. The expression of a person touching something they have lived inside for decades, and discovering it is larger than they knew. And then the final Bifrost opened. This one was different in the way that all previous differences had been of degree rather than kind. The others had been transits, purposeful, scaled, the Bifrost operating at working capacity for moving people from one location to another. This was not a transit. This was the Bifrost opened by Gungnir, which had carried Gungnir's frequency for 4,000 years, and the instrument and the hand that held it had become, over that duration, indistinguishable in the physical grammar of what they produced when they acted together. The light column that touched down in the center of Hogwarts' courtyard was the diameter of a tower and ran from the granite beneath to the cloud cover above, and the cloud cover did not disperse. It vacated, with the efficiency of weather that has recognized something in its airspace that outranks it. The sky over the courtyard went from overcast Scottish gray to a blue so deep and clear it looked structural, like something you could press your hand against, and it held that quality for the duration as though it understood this moment required visibility. Bifrost light was gold, not the gold of decoration or of wealth but the gold of stellar cores, the gold of things that produce light rather than reflecting it, and it moved in the column with the slow rotation of something that was not turbulent, but was simply the physical expression of a power so absolute that it had its own weather system. Then it resolved. The light did not fade gradually. It completed, the way a sentence completed, and what it left standing in the center of Hogwarts' courtyard was, for one full second, simply a man. Tall, gray-cloaked, one eye, a walking staff that touched the ground and made the ground remember it. A man who looked in that first second, as though he had been walking for a very long time toward a destination he had already decided about and had now arrived at. The second made it impossible to continue seeing him as simply a man. It was not the armor, though the armor was present under the cloak, dark metal, worked with runes that were not decorative. It was not Gungnir, though Gungnir's head caught the clear blue sky above and held it. It was not the eye, which held depth the way the ocean held depth, not surface visible, but immediately understood as present. It was the quality of him as a space in the courtyard, the sense that the air around him had organized itself differently from the air elsewhere, had made arrangements in his vicinity, had agreed to behave in a particular way in the presence of someone who had been negotiating with the fundamental nature of reality for 4 millennia, and who reality had, over time, come to take seriously. Frigga was at his left shoulder. She wore satyr silver, formal without ceremony, and her hands were at her sides, and her eyes were moving through the courtyard with the systematic patience of a woman who had already done the structural work and was verifying the results. She looked at the professors at the entrance. She looked at the windows and the faces pressed against them. She looked at the Vanir emissaries and the Einherjar and the Nidavellir vessels above and the light in the tree line, and her expression as she took each inventory point was the expression of a craftsperson examining finished work, not satisfied exactly, because satisfaction implied the possibility of insufficiency, but certain. Thor was 2 steps behind on the right. He was wearing full Asgardian royal armor in the formal configuration, which was substantial, and he was wearing it with the ease of someone who had grown up in it, which he had. He was also, despite everything, looking at the Hogwarts castle with the specific expression of someone encountering something old and interesting for the first time and wanting to know more about it, which was Thor's most consistent quality across all registers, the genuine curiosity that sat underneath everything else and occasionally surfaced at moments of high diplomatic gravity, to the consternation of everyone attempting to maintain the appropriate atmosphere. He caught Harry's eye across the courtyard. The look that moved between them had no language equivalent. It was the look of brothers who had grown up fighting each other and fighting for each other, and arguing about everything and agreeing about the things that mattered, which meant the look contained all of that simultaneously, compressed into the duration of held eye contact, and what it communicated in that compressed form was, "We are here, and this is it, and I know." Thor's chin moved in something that was not quite a nod, because it was too slight for that. Harry's did the same. The exchange lasted 1.3 seconds and contained 12 years. Odin moved through the courtyard. He moved the way tides moved, without urgency, without hesitation, at the pace of something that understood that its destination was not going anywhere, because the destination was wherever it was going. The Einherjar opened around him, without signal. The Vanir emissaries oriented without instruction. The dwarven smiths on their ramps above straightened in the particular way of people who have just acknowledged something that outranks them. He moved through the courtyard toward his son. Harry did not go to meet him. This was not protocol. There was no protocol in this context that specified who moved toward whom. It was simply that something in the situation had a correct geometry, and the correct geometry was Odin crossing the courtyard, because Harry had crossed the distance to Earth, and the distance to the Ministry, and the distance to Dumbledore's office, and this crossing was Odin's, and both of them understood the distinction without discussing it. He stopped in front of Harry and looked at him. Not the assessing look that Harry was used to from training evaluations, not the deliberating look of strategic discussion. The look of a man who has sent someone he values into a situation with consequences and is now verifying the outcome. "You look," said Odin, "like your mother dressed your hair." "She did. She does mine also." Odin held his gaze for one moment more, and what was in that moment was the private grammar of their specific relationship, something that had no name in either Old Norse or English or any of the 47 languages Harry had been taught, because it had developed between 2 specific people over 12 years, and was therefore its own thing, not derivable from any general category. Then Odin turned to look at the castle, which was looking back at him in the accumulated way that buildings looked at things, from every window simultaneously. "She told you." "Yes," Harry said. Odin was quiet, looking at Hogwarts. His eye moved over the towers, the battlements, the Gothic mass of it standing in the Scottish hills with 800 years of accumulated intention in its stones. His expression was not admiration. He was not a man given to admiring other people's buildings, but it was something adjacent, a recognition of effort, of the specific quality of a thing that had been built to last and had done so. "It is a good castle," Odin said. "It knows it," Harry said, a pause that contained something that was not quite a smile on either side, but was the infrastructure of one. And Odin turned to face the entrance where Dumbledore had emerged. The headmaster had come to the courtyard with McGonagall at his shoulder, which Harry noted as a choice rather than a coincidence. He had selected company that would cost him nothing in terms of dignity, and would provide him something in terms of structural support, not protection, but the specific steadying effect of standing beside someone who knew the ground. He had taken the time to acquire his hat from somewhere, which meant he had made a decision about the register this encounter required and had dressed for it, and the decision had been formal, but myself. The robes were not his most elaborate. They were the ones he clearly wore when the occasion required him to be recognizably Albus Dumbledore rather than the Supreme Mugwump, because Albus Dumbledore was the more formidable of the two. He crossed the courtyard without hesitation. He walked with the measured pace of someone who understood that the pace you crossed a space at was itself a statement, and who had decided to make that statement at the tempo of someone who had chosen to be here rather than arrived because there was no other option. His eyes moved through the assembled 9 realms with the genuine scholarly attention of a man encountering primary evidence of things he had studied at the limits of available documentation: the Vanir emissaries, the dwarven vessels above, the light in the tree line, the Svartalfheim elves at the western edge. And what was in his eyes as he took each in was not fear, nothing so simple, but the complex response of an exceptional mind meeting information that exceeded its models and choosing in real time to expand the models rather than reject the information. He stopped at a respectful distance from Odin and held his gaze directly, which Harry noted, because Odin's gaze at full formal attendance was the gaze of a man who had been meeting the eyes of kings and monsters and things that defied both categories for 4,000 years, and had developed over that duration a quality of eye contact that most people found necessary to address obliquely. Dumbledore held it without indirection. "Allfather," said Dumbledore. "Headmaster," said Odin. The titles in this order in this context were their own negotiation. I know what you are, and I acknowledge it, and I name myself by my function rather than my rank, which is either modesty or a more sophisticated kind of statement, and we both understand the distinction. Odin looked at him for a moment. "You wrote to me," he said. "I received your letter." The tone was respectful. The legal position was confused. He did not say this as criticism. He said it as a fact requiring acknowledgement before the conversation could proceed on honest ground. "I have come to clarify the legal position, and to speak with you about what comes after." "I appreciate the personal attention," Dumbledore said, and there was something in the word personal that carried its own weight. He was acknowledging the 9 realms in the courtyard and calling it, accurately, personal, which was either extraordinary composure or extraordinary nerve, or most likely, both operating simultaneously. "I am told," Odin said, "that you are a man who appreciates directness. I have a complicated relationship with it," Dumbledore said. "But yes, in this context, please." Odin turned to the Vanir herald. "I was a tall woman with the quality of stillness that suggested she did this regularly, and found the scale of the current occasion unremarkable by comparison with what she had previously been asked to herald." She stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice was the voice of someone who had spent centuries projecting to rooms that had no ceilings, and it carried with the specific authority of language that had been constructed to travel rather than merely to sound. The authority of Odin Allfather, King of Asgard, protector of the 9 realms, keeper of the cosmic balance, in the presence of the assembled sovereign representatives of Asgard, Vanaheim, Nidavellir, Ulfheim, and Svartalfheim, let it be entered into the record of Midgard and carried to the root of the world tree. Harry James Potter, born of James Potter and Lily Evans Potter of Midgard, is recognized in perpetuity as Harry Odinson, crowned Prince of Asgard and heir apparent to the sovereignty of the 9 realms. He is of full majority under Asgardian law. He is subject to no jurisdiction but that of the Allfather's house and the cosmic order it maintains. Any act by any Midgardian institution, individual or body corporate to claim authority over his person, compel his attendance, restrict his movement, or direct his service, shall constitute interference in the sovereign affairs of Asgard, and shall receive answer accordingly. This decree is irrevocable. It is witnessed. It is sealed by representatives of 5 of the 9 realms assembled on this ground. Let it stand while the world tree stands. I stepped back. The silence was absolute, and then it was not, because the sound that replaced it was the sound of several hundred people absorbing language that changed the shape of the world they were standing in, all of them choosing differently which part to absorb first, and the aggregate of all those simultaneous absorptions produced a sound like a tide arriving at a new coastline, the specific sound of a situation reconfiguring. In the windows above, Harry was aware, peripherally, specifically of the students. Their faces pressed against the glass, some of them having opened the windows wider to hear more clearly, their expressions ranging from open shock to the particular bright-faced intensity of young people who are in the presence of something they will spend the rest of their lives describing to people who were not there. They were the children of magical Britain, and they were going to grow up in a world where this moment had happened, and some of them were already understanding this, and some of them would not understand it for years. Dumbledore was looking at the ground. Odin let him. This was the detail, the one that Harry would carry from this courtyard the way you carried certain things, not as memory, but as knowledge that settles into the bone and changes how you stand. Odin let him have it. The silence between the herald's last word and Dumbledore's next movement lasted 11 seconds, and Odin stood in those 11 seconds with the patience of someone who had been watching the world process difficult truths for 4,000 years, and had learned that the processing required time, and that the time was worth giving, and he gave it without any indication that the giving cost him anything. Dumbledore raised his head. His eyes were clear and very blue, and what was in them was the specific expression of a man who has arrived, after a very long road, at a ground he did not choose and cannot argue with, and has decided, in the privacy of those 11 seconds, to stand on honestly rather than contest. Prophecy, he said. You know it. I know it, Odin said. All of it. My wife mapped every satyr structure in the child's vicinity within 72 hours of the letter's arrival, Odin said, the sole fragment. Predictive monitoring net, which she has left partially functioning, so that your data is 4 years out of date. The loyalty compulsions, which she removed entirely. He said it without inflection, the way you reported completed tasks. Frigga is thorough. Dumbledore looked at Frigga for the first time directly, and Frigga met his gaze with the calm attention of a woman who had already done what she intended to do and was now simply present. The look that passed between them was not hostile. It was the look of two people who had both spent their lives operating through structures of protection rather than through direct power, who had both built elaborate systems to keep specific things safe, who had both succeeded and failed in ways that were now fully visible to the other. Frigga held his gaze and said nothing, which said everything. Can it be extracted? Dumbledore said, and his voice had dropped below its managed register into the thing underneath, the register of a man asking the question he has been afraid to ask because the answer he expected was no. The fragment, without the host's death, Frigga said. Yes, her voice was what it always was, precise, unhurried, with the quality of someone who has examined all relevant data and arrived at a conclusion and is now simply transmitting it. The soul fragment is distinct from Harry's own satyr signature. The boundary between them is identifiable. Vanir's soul work, a binding rune sequence in the Asgardian third mode, and 7 days of controlled sessions. We have scheduled it. Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment. You've already scheduled it. 3 weeks from now, Frigga said. Harry was in agreement. The timing is his preference. He wanted this meeting concluded first. A pause of 1 beat. He was concerned you would not believe it was possible, and he wanted to tell you himself. Dumbledore turned to Harry. Something had shifted in his face, not simply in the expression, but in the face itself, in the quality of the skin and the depth of the lines, as though some structural tension that had been held there so long it had become architectural had finally, in the span of 20 seconds, released. You were right, Dumbledore said. I didn't believe it was possible. I know, Harry said, and now I do. I know that too. Dumbledore stood with this for a moment. Round them, the courtyard held the assembled 9 realms, the Einherjar grounded in their horseshoe, the Vanir satyr moving in its quiet visible patterns, the dwarven vessels above throwing their black iron shadows across the grounds, the light in the treeline sustaining itself without source, the Svartalfheim elves at the western edge witnessing in their absolute and private silence. The castle behind them was making its low sound, the sound of old stone under new weight, bearing it, choosing to. I have been carrying this for 15 years, Dumbledore said, not to Odin, not to Frigga, but to Harry. Directly without the intermediary of diplomatic register. The weight of it became the floor. I stopped being able to distinguish between the plan and the necessity, and between the necessity and the truth. He was quiet for a moment. I made decisions that required a child to be a sacrifice, and I made them sincerely, and I made them in love with this world and these people, and I made them badly. Yes, Harry said. I'm sorry, Dumbledore said, for what it is worth. It's worth something, Harry said. Not everything, but something. Dumbledore received this as it was intended, not absolution, not rejection, but the accurate, fair-weight response of someone who had decided to be honest about the ledger rather than kind about it. He nodded once. And he turned to Odin. He looked at Odin across the courtyard with the expression of a man who has made a decision and is now going to execute it, and what the decision was legible in his posture before he moved. The resolution in his spine, the quality of his stillness, the way he arranged himself for a deliberate action rather than a reactive one. Albus Dumbledore went to one knee. It was not a collapse. It was not compelled. The courtyard saw, the professors at the entrance saw, the faces at the windows above saw, McGonagall beside him saw, and her expression underwent a brief, private movement before it returned to its usual precise composure. That it was a choice made clearly and without drama, the way significant choices were made, when the person making them had stopped requiring an audience for their sincerity. He knelt on the Hogwarts courtyard stones, one knee, and looked up at Odin and said, I ask for alliance, for my people and for this world, not in submission. We retain our sovereignty, our governance, our right to our own choices and our own errors. He paused. But I am asking you, openly, for help that we cannot provide ourselves, and I am asking in the only way that seemed adequate to the scale of what I am asking. Odin looked at him for the duration of several of his own heartbeats, and Harry, standing 5 feet away, saw in his father's single eye the process that he recognized from years of watching it, not deliberation, because the decision had been made before Odin got on the Bifrost, but something more like verification, checking that the thing in front of him matched the thing he had decided to offer it to. Rise, said Odin. Dumbledore rose. Alliance, said Odin, is what I came to offer. Your sovereignty is not mine to take, and I have not come to take it. He looked at the castle again, and this time the look lasted longer, the eye moving over the towers and the windows and the students' faces with a quality of genuine attention. Your world has children in it, children learning, children who will grow up to build whatever comes after the current disaster, if the disaster is managed correctly. He looked back at Dumbledore. I have an interest in what they build, not in governing it, in its quality. As do I, Dumbledore said. Then we are not in disagreement on the fundamental point, Odin said. Terms will require work. My legal people and yours will find each other's framework sufficient cause for extended frustration. Something in his voice at this was not quite dry humor, but was the temperature-controlled cousin of it, the acknowledgement of absurdity by someone who had been watching absurdity operate for 4,000 years and had developed an appropriate relationship with it. The work will be done. There is also Voldemort, Dumbledore said. I take you at your word that Asgard has a strategy, but I know things about Tom Riddle that. You will brief me, Odin said. Tonight, if you prefer. I have time. He looked at Dumbledore with the directness of someone for whom directness was not a style but a structural commitment. I have been told he is dangerous. I have found, across a long life, that dangerous is a relative term. Relative to what is in this courtyard, it requires some adjustment. Dumbledore considered this for a moment. He has 7 or had 7 Horcruxes. Harry's scar is 1. We have identified 4 others. 2 remain unknown. Frigga, Odin said. Already mapped, Frigga said. A snake belonging to Voldemort, currently at large, and an object at the bottom of a lake in the Scottish Highlands. A cup, small, gold, covered in the soul mark signature of the same fragment type as the others. She looked at Dumbledore. Your lake, I believe, approximately 4 miles from this castle. Dumbledore was very still. You found it from Asgard. I found it from Harry's Seder workroom, Frigga said, 3 days ago. Once you understand the signature, location is a secondary problem. A pause. The snake presents more of a challenge. It is mobile, and the soul fragment has bonded more deeply with the host tissue than in the object cases. You will need Voldemort's own Seder signature to finalize the extraction protocol, which means we need Voldemort. Yes, said Dumbledore, and his voice, saying that single syllable, contained the specific weight of a man who has spent 15 years trying to arrive at the same destination, and has just been handed a map by someone who found it in 3 days, and who is doing the arithmetic on that, and finding it both relieving and devastating in equal, simultaneous measure. You will get to him, Harry said. Both of them looked at him. The Horcruxes first, Harry said. My mother extracts mine. We locate and destroy the others. I'll do the lake. Thor will handle the snake because he enjoys that kind of thing, and Voldemort's snake has apparently never met someone it couldn't intimidate, which will be educational for it. He looked at Dumbledore. Your people know the magical geography of Britain. We need that knowledge. You know Voldemort's history, his psychology, his methodology. We need that too. He looked at Odin. And when all the anchors are gone and there's nothing left to run to. You will be addressed, Odin said, with the finality of an era of history being scheduled. The formal proceedings began an hour later in the Great Hall, which had been the only space in the castle large enough to hold the representatives of 6 realms, and the standing ministry delegation that Fudge had dispatched, via very rapid owl, the moment word had reached him that the 9 realms were in a Scottish courtyard. The ministry delegation arrived via flu and spent their first 10 minutes attempting to locate their diplomatic composure, which had apparently been mislaid somewhere around the moment the Bifrost opened. Harry left them to it. He found himself at the ground's eastern edge, where the grass ran down from the castle's flank toward the tree line, and the Vanaheim gate had long since closed and left no mark on the air, except a faint residual quality of silver light that was already dispersing. The afternoon had gone fully to evening, the Scottish hills drawing their long shadows toward the east, and the sky above going deep blue around the edges, where it was furthest from the setting sun. McGonagall came to stand beside him. She said nothing for a while. This was, Harry had already concluded, one of her consistent qualities. She did not speak to fill space, and she did not perform presence, and she did not ask questions before she had decided whether she actually wanted the answer. She stood with her arms at her sides and looked out at the grounds with the expression of someone who has lived in a place for a very long time and is seeing it, in this moment, from a slightly different height than usual. You're going to talk about this for decades, she said finally. The students, the ones at the windows. Probably, Harry said. Some of them were terrified. Yes, most of them were not, she said, with the specific quality of a woman finding something in a situation that is not exactly reassuring but is at least honest. That may be more instructive. Harry looked at the castle behind them, at the last of the light in the upper windows, at the silhouettes of students still pressed against the glass who would not be moving until dinner required it, and possibly not then. Knew my parents, he said. I did. She said it without ornamentation. What were they like? He had read everything. He had the photographs and the reports and the records, the school documents, the aura files, 2 biographies of varying quality, and the account Remus Lupin had written and sent to Odin when Harry was 7, addressed simply to the Allfather and running to 43 pages, which Odin had read and then handed to Harry without comment when he was 10 and asked whether he wanted it. He had all of that. He was asking something different. McGonagall looked at him for a moment, and then she looked back at the grounds, and she said, "Your mother was the most precise magical mind I have taught in 35 years. She had the kind of intelligence that looked like instinct from the outside, because it worked faster than observation could track, and she had the integrity to use it only in service of things she had genuinely decided mattered." A pause. "She also had your eyes, exactly. It is," she stopped. "It is a notable resemblance." Harry was quiet. "Your father," McGonagall said, "was the most infuriating student I have taught in 35 years, and also, by his 7th year, one of the finest. He had the particular quality of needing to find the edges of things before he trusted them, which in school manifested as rule-breaking, and in the field manifested as courage." Another pause. "He would have wanted to know everything about you, where you've been, what you can do. He would have asked approximately 100 questions in the first conversation and listened to every answer, which was his best quality and the one least evident from the outside." Harry looked at the grounds. The forbidden forest at the edge held its faint residual light, the El Jozulfar's presence still ghosting in the tree line in the last of the evening. The castle behind him was doing its low sound, quieter now, settling into the new weight rather than adjusting to it, a building that had decided what it thought about the day. "Odin brought me to their graves," Harry said. "When I was 8, McGonagall looked at him. He didn't tell me we were going. He told me to dress warmly." Harry was looking at the tree line. "We stood there for I don't know how long. He didn't say anything. Eventually he put his hand on my shoulder and we went home." He paused. He'd never met them. "He did it because I needed to go, and because he knew I needed someone there when I did." McGonagall was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful in the way of someone carrying something that requires both hands. "He sounds," she said, "like a formidable father." "He is," Harry said. "They both are." She nodded. They stood in a silence that was not uncomfortable, the silence of 2 people who have arrived by different roads at the same piece of ground and are standing on it together for the moment without requiring anything more of each other. From inside the castle, through the stone and the lit windows, the sound of the great hall and its improvised diplomatic configuration filtered out. Voices, movement, the specific acoustic signature of a very large room containing a very complex situation that a large number of people were working very hard to address. Vanir Seder inflections and ministry vowels, and the percussion of dwarven communication, and underneath it all the rolling, measured Old Norse of Odin concluding a treaty clause or a strategic point or a determination about what came next, which was the voice Harry had grown up inside of, the voice that sounded like gravel rolled in ancient gold, and which meant, regardless of what it was saying, regardless of the context, that things were being handled. Inside the hall, Thor had apparently made the acquaintance of the Weasley twins, which Heimdall had reported to Harry 3 minutes ago via the earring rune he wore in his left ear, in the voice of someone who found this development both inevitable and of great potential interest to posterity. Harry almost smiled, didn't. "Tomorrow," said McGonagall, with the air of a woman drawing something to point, "there will be a great deal to organize. Legal frameworks, educational access for the delegation, the question of Voldemort's timeline and the Ministry's cooperation, and I expect the particular bureaucratic crisis that will result from the International Confederation receiving a formal Asgardian alliance treaty that they are going to need to ratify in emergency session, while simultaneously pretending they had some control over the last 48 hours. She paused. "It will be, in professional terms, extraordinary." "Yes," Harry said. "Tonight, however," she said, "you should eat something. The elves have kept a plate, 3rd classroom on the left from the entrance hall." Harry looked at her. "Graper sent a rune," she said, without visible apology. "Your father asked him to." Harry stood with this for a moment, the specific quality of it. The image of Graper in Asgard, in the training yard probably, writing a rune message to a Hogwarts professor he had never met to make sure that the prince ate dinner on his first day in Midgard, because the prince had a documented tendency to not eat on training days, which Graper had been noting in his reports for 2 years, and because someone with access to those reports had read them and acted on them. Not dramatically. Not with a statement, just a plate, kept warm, 3rd classroom on the left. "Tell him," Harry said, "that I filled out the maintenance report for the wall." "I will do no such thing," McGonagall said. "That is information he will have to discover on his own." She turned and walked back toward the castle, with the bearing of a woman returning to a familiar place that has just become, in the span of a single afternoon, permanently different, and who intends to meet the difference with her usual standards. Harry turned back to the grounds. The forbidden forest held its silver quality of light. Hills beyond the grounds were dark now, the sky above them going to its deepest color, and the stars were coming in from the east, Midgardian stars, the specific stars of this sky, the ones he had studied on paper but not yet stood under with this view, and they were different from Asgard's stars the way everything here was different. Not lesser, not greater, but another version of the same vast enterprise. He put his hand on Skinfaxy's hilt, not a threat, not a declaration, just the place stillness rested when it needed somewhere. Inside the great hall, through the stone, his father's voice moved through a treaty clause with the measured pace of someone who had done this before and would do it again, and did not confuse repetition with diminishment. Frigga's voice, quieter, precise, was doing what Frigga's voice always did, arriving at the conclusion before anyone else had identified the question, and framing the conclusion in the kind of language that made agreement feel like the person agreeing's own idea. And somewhere in the castle behind him, third classroom on the left, a plate kept warm, Hogwarts was doing what it had done for 800 years, keeping something safe that needed keeping. Harry looked up at the Midgardian stars. He thought about the cupboard, deliberately as calibration, as the honest accounting he performed at intervals so that it stayed a fact rather than a wound. The cold of it, the dark, 4 years old and already understanding in the bone-deep way that children understood things before they had words for the understanding, that this was not where he was supposed to be. He held it for its duration, and he set it against what he was standing in, the Scottish evening, the 9 realms at his back and the castle at his back, Frigga's gold cord in his hair, his brother somewhere inside making what would certainly be a catastrophic but extremely well-intentioned impression on the Weasley twins, Odin's voice through the stone carrying the absolute gravel-gold certainty of something that does not consider the possibility of failure, because failure has been categorically ruled inapplicable. Cold in the cupboard had been real, so was this. He stood on the grounds of Hogwarts Castle on the first night the 9 realms had spent on British soil, and he looked at the stars his birth parents had looked at from these same hills, and he held both things simultaneously, what he had come from and what he was, and he did not need to choose between them, because there was no choosing required. What he was had already chosen him, 4,000 years before his birth, on the day Odin looked at whatever Heimdall showed him and made a decision in 3 seconds, in the same way that every true thing had been decided in this family, before the words were available for it, before the need was named, in the specific 3-second resolution of recognition. His father, recognizing his child. He was still standing there when the night deepened fully, and the stars settled into their positions, and the castle's windows one by one went warm with interior light, and the sound inside shifted from the formal weight of treaty-making to the quieter, more human register of people finding chairs and talking, and the particular collaborative sound of problems being worked on by people who have decided together to work on them. He was still there when the footsteps came across the grass behind him. He did not turn. He knew the footsteps, had known them for 12 years, the weight and the rhythm and the unhurried certainty of them, the gait of a man who did not walk around things. Odin stopped beside him. He stood for a moment looking at the same darkness and the same stars, with the same quality of attention he applied to everything, full, deliberate, unhurried. The Gungnir was quiet in his hand, no longer at the register of formal attendance, just a spear, just the familiar weight of something carried so long it was no longer separate from the carrying. Frigga sends word, Odin said, that there is food inside. McGonagall told me. Graper asked me to confirm. I know, Harry said. Graper worries. He reports, Odin said. He is precise in his reports. A silence. The good kind, the kind that had weight without pressure, the kind that meant what was in it, did not require language to exist, and was only being given language as a courtesy to language. Dumbledore, Harry said. He'll hold to the alliance. He will, Odin said. He is not a man who makes commitments without intent. His errors have been of method, not of will. He looked out at the hills. He will be a useful ally. He knows things about this world that are worth knowing. And Tom Riddle will be addressed, Odin said, with the tone that indicated the matter was decided, and the discussion of it was informational rather than deliberative, not immediately. In sequence as you laid it out in the courtyard. Harry had not realized Odin had heard that exchange. He thought about the training yard, about Graper not optimizing, about tells. You were checking my sequencing, Harry said. I was observing your sequencing, Odin said. There is a distinction. What's the distinction? Checking implies I expected an error. Harry was quiet for a moment. The stars turned overhead at the speed of planet rotation, which was imperceptible except across the length of an evening, and was therefore the kind of motion that required patience to witness. After, Harry said. After the Horcruxes, after Riddle. What does the alliance actually look like? Midgard and Asgard. Work, Odin said. The hard and administrative kind. Frameworks, protocols. The specific friction of two systems that developed entirely independently attempting to function in relationship. He was quiet for a moment. There will be people who resist it on both sides. There will be compromises that satisfy no one entirely. There will be crises we have not anticipated, because there are always crises we have not anticipated. He looked at Harry. And there will be someone to address those crises who knows both worlds from the inside. Harry looked at him. "That is not an assignment," Odin said. "That is an observation about what you are and what that is useful for." He paused. "The decision about how to use it is yours." Harry turned back to the stars. The stars did not care about the distinction, and they did not care about Midgardian magical bureaucracy, and they did not care about Tom Riddle or treaty frameworks or the specific friction of developing diplomatic protocols. They were doing what they had been doing for the full duration of everything, which was to exist at stellar temperatures and mind their own business, and there was something in that which Harry found clarifying rather than humbling. Odin spoke one more time, in Old Norse, in the specific register of the language that was not formal and not ceremonial, but was the register of home. The register Harry had grown up inside, the register of the dinner table and the training yard in the corridor outside his rooms, and the long quiet evenings when he and his father sat in the same room not speaking, and both knew what the not speaking contained. He said, "Thu ert min soner, thar liker melanu. You are my son. That is the end of the matter, the end of the matter. Not the beginning of a policy, not the foundation of an alliance, not the strategic positioning of a crown prince in relation to a new political territory. The end of the matter, everything else, the 9 realms in the castle, the treaty being written inside, the Horcruxes and the Dark Lord and the Ministry's next 15 diplomatic crises, was what came after the end of the matter, which was a different category, a practical category, the category of things that required work and would receive it. The matter itself had ended 12 years ago on a perfectly ordinary English street, in a column of golden light, when an old man with one eye had looked at a cupboard under a staircase and arrived at a decision in 3 seconds. Harry put both hands at his sides. The castle behind him held its warmth and its noise and its 800 years. The 9 realms were inside it. His family was inside it. Hogwarts stood on its Scottish hill and bore the weight of what had arrived in its courtyard, today with the particular stoic dignity of a building that had absorbed 8 centuries of extraordinary events and had learned to treat the extraordinary as the expected register rather than the exception. Tomorrow there would be work. Tonight there were stars and a father standing in the dark beside him, and a plate kept warm in the 3rd classroom on the left, and the Midgardian constellations turning overhead in the patient revolution of things that predated everything and would outlast everything, and in the meantime simply went on being what they were. Harry looked up at them for a long moment, then he turned toward the castle.